I'm Indy and welcome to another exciting edition of Out of the Trenches, where I sit here in the chair of wisdom and answer your questions about World War I. The Karate Kid writes, I must ask, what did Indy's family do during World War I? For me, family history is the most interesting part in all of this. I actually wrote an answer to this post in the comments section of an episode, but it seemed like a good one to include here. So here it goes again. In World War II, not World War I, my grandfather was a bombardier in the Royal Air Force in North Africa. His name was Basil Ray, and he had actually been living in Egypt a few years before the war, where he was superintendent of schools for the British Dominion of Egypt. He died in 1987, and at that point, still detested Germans, but had enormous respect for Rommel. Now it's trickier with World War I. See, I grew up in Texas, right? And my dad's family is all Russian and Polish, and most of them went to the States just after the first Russian Revolution in 1905. And as far as I know, none of them fought in the war, although Smart Money says I have relatives who stayed behind and fought on the Eastern Front. On my mother's side, though, my World War II grandpa was an only child, and his dad was a vicar and stayed home in England. But my grandmother was one of 11 children, born in 1902 and was the third youngest, and they lived in London, so I guarantee she had elder brothers who fought in the war, but I have no information on them and haven't taken the time to find out, actually. More fool me. 115 Predator writes, maybe this has been explained already and I forgot by now, but what exactly is meant by the British were the only ones with a fully professional army? Was the typical British soldier much better trained and or equipped than all other armies? If so, why was this so? Well, the other countries in Europe had armies that were formed by conscription, which was maybe for a couple of years, and their officers were, often from the best families, and it was a mark of prestige, sort of a hereditary thing. But it was different with the British. The British regulars were a paid professional army of well-trained and very often battle-experienced soldiers, no conscription. Now there is really no question, in my mind at least, that the British professionals were the best soldiers in the world at the outbreak of the war, but there weren't that many of them. There were around 100,000 of them against, for starters, a couple million German conscripts, right? By the end of 1914, that professional British army was no more. It was replaced by volunteers and eventually conscripts after the heavy losses at battles like Ypres and Mons. See, the British had relied on that small, very well-trained army combined with their immense naval strength to secure the empire, and this did not work so well in mainland Europe. This is a question from Reddit. Brandor asks about Conrad von Hötzendorf. How the hell is that man considered to be a military genius? Can someone explain that to me? No, I can't. It baffles me. You know what though? I'm not going to let it go there. Conrad von Hötzendorf got exactly what he wanted. He'd pushed Franz Joseph, the emperor, to make war in the Balkans a couple of dozen times in 1913 and 1914 to try to expand the empire. And the only thing really preventing this from happening was Archduke Franz Ferdinand, who was firmly against war. So Ferdinand dies and Conrad has his excuse and he goes to war and all hell breaks loose. And millions of people die and millions of people get wounded, and Conrad's glorious empire that's been around for like 600 years gets ground to pieces because of his incompetence. Okay, he was not Hitler, no, but with no Conrad, I say it's pretty good that there's no war, at least not an Austro-Hungarian war in 1914, especially with Franz Ferdinand still in the picture trying to give the Slavic minorities a larger voice in the empire. Now, Moltke and the German general staff, however, in 1914 still thought they needed to fight Russia before 1917, when they believed Russia would be technologically advanced enough that she could crush Germany with the added weight of her manpower. I kind of see a war happening anyhow, but not this war, and Conrad was a curse for the empire. And the fact that there are streets and things still named after him today in Austria when all he brought was ruin is... Yeah, I don't know. I don't even have a word for what that is. You know who Conrad reminds me of? You know the comic strip Dilbert? He's like Dilbert's boss, with the pointy hair. Conrad von Hötzendorf, he was Dilbert's boss. I think that's who Conrad reminds me of. You can cut that out later. Mark Grange writes, didn't Rommel fight in World War II and was the Desert Fox? Yes he did. Yes, he was. We actually mentioned Rommel and some of his actions in World War I in our episode from week 27, which is also a great episode about Conrad von Hötzendorf, and you can check it out right here. Please ask us more questions in the comments, and if you want a glimpse behind the scenes of our show, like us on Facebook. See you next time.